Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for being here for Becoming Better Ancestors, 9 Lessons from Global Health to Change the World. This is a legacy project of Dr. Bill Fahey, who you all heard from this morning, and Dr. Mark Rosenberg, who is with us today. It is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panelists who will be joining us and speaking today. We have Dr. Mark Rosenberg. Please join us on stage, our moderator. Please give him a round of applause. President and CEO Emeritus at the Task Force for Global Health. We also have Dr. Rebecca Weintraub, founding faculty director of the Global Health Delivery Project at Harvard University. Welcome. And who you also heard from this morning, Dr. Judy Monroe, the CEO of the CDC Foundation. Welcome. And we're also pleased to welcome Dr. Ayman El-Mohandes, the Dean of the City University of the New York Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy, and Chair of the Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health. Please welcome. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Rosenberg, and you'll use this mic and share the others. Yes.
Thank you, Brian. It is really good to see all of you here today, and thank you for coming. I think you'll agree that we have a group of extraordinary people to be our panelists here. Brian has given the formal introduction. I'll tell you just a couple of tiny important things about each one. Rebecca works on global health delivery and is also a clinician who vaccinated the staff at her hospital early on in the pandemic, and she said it was the most gratifying clinical thing she's ever done. And she has gone on to look at how to get vaccine in an equitable way to people around the world, focusing on equity as a driving force for vaccine distribution. Judy Monroe is the president and CEO of the CDC Foundation, who has worked in public health all her life, from working as a state public health officer to working for years at CDC, acting as a liaison with state, local, and territorial groups, and is very dedicated, even now at the CDC Foundation, to some of the same principles. And Ayman El-Mohandes is the Dean of the City University of New York School of Public Health and is deeply committed to social justice and has really brought about a remarkable transformation at that school. So again, welcome for me, these 3 people who are on our panel. Georges Benjamin, the executive director of APHA, will be joining us shortly. He'll join us up here. Let me set the stage for this project. And one of the questions you might ask is, why are these people interested in sharing this information and sharing these principles? And I think there is no profit incentive in all of this. All of these materials will be available to you on the website for free. A teaching guide you can download for free. And what we hope to draw on is a commitment that I would bet every single one of you shares, and that is to making the future better by teaching future leaders, whether you're mentors, teachers, or practitioners, and other people learn from you by doing or seeing what you have done. This, I believe, is a driving force for every single one of us. And it's the same thing that led us to try and do these and drove Bill Fahey to share the knowledge of his accumulated years in public health and global health through these 9 lessons, to share them with all of us. And this arose out of a celebration of the 40th anniversary of the eradication of smallpox. It's the only human disease that's ever been eradicated from the face of the earth, an extraordinary achievement. And you saw in the trailer the horror of this disease, the pustules that form on the affected person's body are basically rotting flesh. While you're alive, your body starts to putrefy. The stench of infected individuals was horrendous. You could smell it 50 yards away. And the suffering of the people who had this disease was worse than horrendous. The disease was a terror. The disease was a terrorist. We showed you the scenes in the trailer because it's not around anymore. And as you heard described this morning, we go in cycles. and we forget the diseases that aren't visible, that we don't see, but this one was really awful. We're going to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the eradication of the disease with a huge conference bringing together a lot of the original smallpox warriors, but then came COVID, and we couldn't have the conference. So we decided we would take the lessons from the eradication of smallpox and transform them in a way that could reach other people, even without a conference. We thought maybe we should have lectures, an hour lecture on each lesson. And then someone told us, do you know what the attention span of young people today is? And I said, oh, it's like an hour. We had 1 hour lectures on everything. He said, if you're lucky, it's 5 minutes. So we tried to make a series of videos that are compelling and have very short segments in them. You'll see some of them today, and hopefully you saw the trailer once or twice already today. We think that these are 9 very important lessons. We tried to pick the most important lessons from our lessons with smallpox eradication and put them into a form that would be very simple and very clear. Charlie Mingus, a famous American jazz musician, used to say, to take something simple and make it complicated, any darn fool can do that. But to take something really complicated and make it simple, that is genius. These, we hope, are simple lessons, abstracted from years of practice and work and thought and discussion. Many people contributed to them. Bill likes to say, none of these are original. Everything you will see and hear has been plagiarized. We stand on the shoulders of the world, and not only this past generation, but many generations back. And we hope that for you, these lessons in this form will be a useful teaching tool. The lessons are of no value unless they're applied. And this is where we are counting on you to take them and apply them, take them and teach them, take them and pass them on. Bill also quotes Mark Twain, who says, the man who does not read has no advantage of the man who cannot read. The man who does not read has no advantage over the man who cannot read. If we don't take these to heed, and in the COVID pandemic response, most of these were violated. If we don't take them to heart and apply them in what we do and teach them to the people we hope will lead the next generation, they will be of no use. That's where we are. That's why we're doing this. And we hope that you will leave here and take these with you, whether it's in the pocket cards or whether it's in the books or your access. You can just go to the website, 9lessons.org, and download everything here. Please take it. Please steal it. Please use it. This is for you. This is to make the world a better place and to help all of us become better ancestors. We have
The lessons from smallpox eradication have never been more relevant as countries struggle to get and keep the COVID-19 pandemic under control. Digging into the specific experiences of public health leaders with smallpox and other major global health threats, we'll ask really big questions and explore what we call 9 lessons from global health to change the world. 9 proven, simple, reliable ways to create positive change consistently as we all tackle ever more complex problems across human societies. 9 approaches to becoming better ancestors. Dr. Bill Foege is a legend in public health. He served as director of the Center for Disease Control under Presidents Carter and Reagan. After serving 6 years as the head of the CDC, Dr. Fahey co-founded the Task Force for Child Survival, now the Task Force for Global Health, and joined the Carter Center as its first executive director. In 2012, President Barack Obama awarded Dr. Fahey the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, for his work in global health, in particular for helping to eradicate smallpox. Hello, Dr. Fahey. It's such an honor to talk to you.
Thank you, Zainab. I am so pleased that you're doing this series because it's very important to many people in global health, and particularly to me.
Of course. So the threat of extinction as a species is very real.
Very real indeed. And as a grandfather, I've thought so often about this. I think the greatest threat we face is climate change. But I would very quickly put some other threats on the list, nuclear war being one, synthetic biology, that is, putting genes in different places. Someday there's going to be a tragic outcome with that. And artificial intelligence. It won't be long before we'll have computers that can think faster than all of the billions of people in the world put together. So it used to be that we worried about the natural threats of the diseases like plague and smallpox, and now with coronavirus. Now we have to think about human nature as a threat.
In addition to your work eradicating smallpox, you've given us a great gift, Dr. Fahey, in describing the 9 lessons that we'll dig into throughout this series. Tell us about them.
Smallpox eradication really taught us hundreds of lessons, but we've selected 9 to focus on. Lesson 1, this is a cause and effect world. And if we actually understand causes, we have some chance of changing the effects. Number 2, know the truth, share the truth, act on the truth. Einstein said, if you have the privilege of seeking truth, you have an obligation to use it and share it. Lesson 3, use coalitions to achieve real collaboration. The lesson here is there is no alternative. No one does anything by themselves. And the coalitions that work are the ones where both the leader and the followers have agreed to the outcome ahead of time. Lesson number 4, avoid certainty. It's the Achilles heel of science. It stops you from trying to find new information if you're certain. Lesson 5, build in evaluation and improvement. It's the way of seeking truth after you've started a program to know whether what you are doing is working or not working. Number 6, respect the culture. Culture matters. And if you tangle with culture, I can tell you culture will always win. Lesson number 7, base your decisions on the best science, but the results will depend on the best management. And therefore, you cannot just have a body of knowledge. It has to get its strength from being used, and this is done by the best management. Lesson number 8, mobilize political will. If you have political will, you can do great things. If you don't, you will be stopped in your tracks. And finally, lesson number 9, choose solutions that bring us closer to global health equity. Borders for nations are arbitrary. We have to think globally.
I really look forward to speaking to you more. We'll get to spend an episode on each of these 9 lessons. And I'm so glad to share this learning experience with you, Dr. Fahey.
Thank you. You too, Zainab.
Destiny is not preordained. As Jonas Salk said, evolution will be what we want it to be. Or, as memorialized in New York subway graffiti, don't confuse bad management with destiny. How we understand and manage our own lives, our families and communities, our countries and the world impacts the future. We have the power to change our own destiny and the destiny of future generations. And the best part is that we can change it for the better.
Let me ask a question of our panelists, and let me ask you to pick one of these lessons that you have applied in your work and tell us how you used it, and tell us a story about the application of this principle that shows in a way that stands out to you that the lesson was important and useful. Let me start with you, Ayman. You've been an epidemiologist, a pediatrician, a teacher, and now a dean. What's the value of these lessons to people who teach epidemiology? Ayman.
Good evening, everybody. I think the very strong lesson I learned from these 9 points is the following, is that we have to stand on strong ethical ground in public health and public health intervention. Lesson 1, lesson 2, adhering to truth. Lesson 4 and 6, intellectual and cultural humility. Lesson 9, which basically adhering to equity as a principle in what we do, is a very important platform upon which we apply practical and pragmatic aspects of intervention, such as mobilizing political will, seeking strong leadership, building and evaluating an improvement, as well as scientific basis and coalition building. I think the very important lesson I have learned in the many years that I have practiced, either with individuals, with communities, with governments, with agencies, is that adhering to clear ethical principles in terms of truth and humility and seeking equity may be poo-pooed by some as impractical, may be considered by some as haughty, but I have found that they are extremely practical. Ethical principles are very clear guidelines to success. And no matter what I learned in math as an epidemiologist, or in biology or chemistry or human anatomy or intensive care, I know in my heart that if I do not adhere to these ethical principles, no matter what skill, what competency I bring to the intervention, I know that it will either fail or it will not last.
Thanks, Ayman, very much. Let me turn to Rebecca for a second. I'll come back to you, Judy. I'll give you another minute to think. So, Rebecca, you teach students in global health, and you teach students from low and middle income countries. What's the value of these 9 lessons? And a big part of what you tried to get across has to do with equity. What made you pick equity as a driving principle, and how is that useful in what you do and teach?
Thank you, Mark, for the questions. An honor to be on this panel. We think about how to ensure the next generation is trained to take on one of the most complex challenges, which is the delivery gaps to meet an equity strategy. And when we think about the talent base and the clarity that goes into discovery, our friends in biology, in chemistry, they review the literature, they have PIs, they have guidance. And how could we build that type of framework so you could see the patterns that are context dependent and those that are context independent? And when I look at these 9 lessons, for me, they are the clinical pearls of public health, where we move from acts as individuals, acts of leadership as individuals, to acts of collective power, collective decision-making.
And do you find these lessons, you teach cases. You teach cases in the history of global health delivery with a focus on what makes public health able to deliver the goods, not just do the research, not just write the proposals, but actually deliver the goods, whether it's vaccines or whether it's drugs to prevent HIV, AIDS, antiretrovirals. You look at what makes public health successful in delivery, Do you find that these lessons are useful in teaching those cases and those lessons?
Absolutely, and this is obviously, these are incredible teaching objectives. You could create modules regarding each of these 9 lessons, and also our cases are also available online at no cost, so we could help you build these modules if of interest. The piece that we find striking from so many students, many of whom have become the ministers of health, minister of education of their countries, is that they want to understand the frameworks of management, the frameworks of strategy. They want to improve their decision-making, and they want coaching along the way. And when we think of the examples of smallpox, of polio, of measles, this is how we will be coached to prepare for the next threats.
Thanks, Rebecca. And some of the work you do in delivery was inspired by Jim Kim, who saw that public health doesn't know how to deliver, and we should learn from business. Because in business, if you don't deliver your goods, if you don't sell your goods, you don't make money, you don't make a profit, and that's what you're in the business for. Not for telling people about how smart you were in developing your product, but for getting the product to them. That's what makes it work. And so in those cases, one of the cases you did was actually about smallpox, and that's available for people now. Do you want to say a word about that case?
Well, I'll take a step back. When we think about business school education in the United States, it's based off of this case method so that you can scenario plan and prepare yourself to be the protagonist, to be the CEO. We thought, gosh, we don't want the next generation of CEO of Enron's or Exxon. We want the next Bill Foegge's. We want people to be prepared from the lessons from Bill, the lessons of Paul Farmer, as they move on into their next roles. And that requires actually an assessment of your own ability and how you'll be making decisions, and then to obviously reflect on those around you. And it's really been an honor to write the case that's now live about a blueprint for future public health strategy based on the experience of eradicating smallpox. We actually believe many folks age 20 don't know about the smallpox story. We're going to be doing a pre-test before we roll the case out, and to then think, obviously, how do we implement this to prepare for the future threats?
Thanks, Rebecca. And if you go to the website, 9lessons.org, you'll see this Harvard Business School teaching case. And the case is designed to use as a teaching tool with teaching notes. It's there on the website, 9lessons.org. Welcome, Georges. Nice to see you. We're glad you came. Thanks. Judy, you have worked at state and national levels. You worked at CDC for a long time as an observer and practitioner about state health programs. Do you think that these lessons, or any particular ones of them, are most useful to you in the work that you do now? You review lots of proposals at the CDC Foundation. You award money. You judge those proposals. Are there ways in your past work that these lessons you think are useful and valuable?
So it's a resounding yes to the question. I love the pearls, the way you frame that around the clinical pearls for public health. So in our work at the CDC Foundation, yeah, we do review proposals and we work with a lot of partners. I think this is just platinum to have these. I think you can use them as a checklist for proposals and as folks come in. But let me tell you a quick story about work that we did in Puerto Rico during Zika, if I may, because I think all of these 9 lessons work together. So it's hard to pick one, as you were mentioning. But during Zika in Puerto Rico, we had a situation where, as you all know, horrible birth defects. And Puerto Rico did not have, when the assessment was done by CDC, access to birth control was pretty non-existent. It was a very high rate of unintended pregnancy. Demand for abortion was increasing in the face of Zika. And so we were asked to get involved with the partners. And when I look at these lessons, we ended up doing the Zika Contraception Access Network, which basically gave every woman on the island of Puerto Rico same day, free of charge, their choice of the state-of-the-art spectrum of reversible contraception. Now, how did we do that? Coalitions had to be built. We had to the cause and effect world, the the virus was causing these birth defects. I can go through each one, and we had to respect the culture. There's a background. Think about the history of Puerto Rico and women and reproductive rights and so forth, equity. But so all of these mattered. But the one I'll zero in on was building evaluation and improvement. Because every day, my question as the CEO was, what's our rate limiting step? Because we had an urgency. The sooner we could get access to the reversible contraception, that's one more infant, how many more infants that weren't going to be impacted by this virus? And so what was the rate limiting step? Well, we had to proctor, we had to train, the obstetricians on the island, they didn't even know how to use these products, so we had to train them, they needed to be proctored, and we had a rate limiting step in that step. And because of intense evaluation, and thanks to colleagues at CDC, we in real time were identifying, and then we shifted course. We shifted how we managed that, and then monitored that, and saw that we broke through. And it ended up being a highly successful project, but only because, as I looked at these 9 lessons, I think because we applied all 9.
Thanks, Judy. George is welcome here. I'm going to ask you
Thanks for having me.
a question a little different. I think you all know, or you should know, you're executive director of APHA, George's Benjamin. And George's, you've had the privilege of knowing Bill Foege for quite a while. You introduced him today in his video, and he's been a speaker here, and he was a president of APHA before. In part, the value of these lessons, I think we impugn from knowing Bill and knowing that he's wise. Do you think that the fact that these lessons come from Bill Foege gives them any additional value we should be aware of?
Well, look, Bill is a process guy. He's a really smart guy. And he's, had lots of life experiences. And I think one of the things that brings wisdom to these lessons is the fact that they're, in many ways, a culmination of his life experiences and an evidence base of what works through a practical aspect. He has seen when things have worked real well, when they did A, B, or C, and saw when things didn't go well when they were done differently. And I think that brings extraordinary value to this approach. If you look at it, it really is very holistic. It's population-based. And if one applies these to problems, I think they force you to ask the fundamental questions of how to get change.
And that change is important to get us to a better place.
It's absolutely essential. I mean, the problem is that, everybody wants the magic pill or the magic act, and, change takes time, and it takes a collaboration, but it also takes someone to sit down, close their eyes, and think about what the problem is, what are they trying to solve, and what are the tools they have to solve it with. And at the end of the day, it requires enormous political will of somebody to make that happen.
Thanks, Georges. You heard Bill say this morning in his introduction that was videotaped that he's a grandfather. And he thinks about his grandchildren and the world they will live in. And he talked about a public health professional who gave a public address in his 90s. And everyone thought he would look back and celebrate the past like we assume all old people do. They don't. I'm starting to see that. They don't. And Bill himself looks far ahead. I always try to give the kind of talk I've heard him give so many times. And I say, I'm not going to look at what we're going to do about this problem next year. I'm going to look at what we're going to do about this problem 10 years ahead. And then Bill follows me and he talks about, do you know what it's going to be like 100 years from now? And he does look to the future. We all look to the future. because the only threat we're facing is not COVID right now. There are others on the horizon. And I want to show you a part of the lessons that deal with the threats that we will all be facing, because we think that these lessons may help us.
Dr. Jonas Salk developed the first polio vaccine, and he once said that it's very wise to be a good citizen, but the real challenge is to be a good ancestor. And he hoped his vaccine would contribute to that because it would be used by children for generations to come. I like to think of children born 300 years from now, 400 years from now, having given us their proxy vote, and they're asking us to please make the right decisions. So if we see them looking over our shoulder every day as we make decisions, we will make the right decisions to be good ancestors.
We have been shaping and reshaping our planet, the only home humans have ever known, for thousands of years. About this tiny spaceship called Earth, we have explored, invented, and conquered. Humankind has faced incredible odds, and we've also created many of our own new problems. Now that our societies are maturing, albeit imperfectly, how do we start to think about solving more problems than we create? What are the next threats our planet faces? How do we set our next goals if we want to change the world? And for those of us who strive to be problem solvers in our world today, how do we do it? I'm Zainab Selvi, founder of Women for Women International. Like many of you, I've been driven in my life to try and solve some of the world's big challenges. I am deeply passionate about fixing the things I see that are broken in our world. And I've asked myself, how can we do this problem-solving and world-changing work purposefully, consistently, and most importantly, do it successfully? We have to figure this out if humans are going to survive. In the words of Jonas Salk, who developed the first vaccine for polio, it is relevant and even part of wisdom to ask not only are we being good citizens of the world today, but are we being good ancestors? Salk was asking a very important question. What can we do so that future citizens of the world will judge us to have left this world in better shape than we found it? I'd like to invite you to join me for this virtual learning mini-series, Becoming Better Ancestors, as we talk with some of the great minds of our time, working to improve the world today. Digging into the specific experiences of public health leaders with smallpox and other major global threats, we'll ask hard questions and explore what we call 9 lessons from global health to change the world. I also encourage you to explore and contribute to 9lessons.org throughout your journey to becoming better ancestors, and as you go on to create positive change in our world, to share your experience and wisdom with others. So let's get started. While we are filming this series, we are living in the middle of one of the worst pandemics in modern history. We have lost millions of lives. Still more will have lasting complications from COVID-19. We should have done this better. We certainly knew better. That's one of the major reasons why we are filming this series. And there are still more global threats on the horizon. I'm speaking to many preeminent scientists and activists from around the world. I want to know more about challenges we humans really face, and I want you to really think about what we are up against. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So what are the serious threats facing humanity in the coming decades?
Boy, there are a lot of them. But I've just seen the rollout of COVID vaccines in the United States, which has been an amazing accomplishment to have vaccines made by the billions and to have so many people refusing to take vaccines. We have to be able to inform them better, and we have to be able to stop the disinformation, which has been so difficult to deal with.
One is that we currently pay people to destroy the planet. So for example, if you go out and you cut down a rainforest, what do? Do we take that person and throw them in jail? Do we say that you're being charged with crimes against the planet and crimes against humanity? No, we give that person a lot of money for doing it. We have a financial system that encourages degrading the planet. So I believe that we need to develop alternative systems that allow people to make good livelihoods without destroying the planet.
I am haunted when I go out to villages in rural Africa and see the little kids running around and sometimes not having a school to go to. We have no way of predicting what's in those little heads. I know, for example, a young man who grew up in a tiny village in Mali became an astrophysicist out at Pasadena, was one of the people who helped guide one of those Mars rovers. I recall another young man grew up in northern Nigeria, became an engineer at General Motors, and designed the exterior of the Chevrolet Volt. I just think of how much humankind is losing when children under those circumstances are unable to physically thrive, but then also become educated. It's important to understand that it's in all of our interests that those children be able to thrive everywhere.
The fact that we've seen some particular businesses and billionaires getting richer by the billions during the pandemic and being able to take trips to outer space while the pandemic has had this devastating economic impact that is going to go on for some years in Africa, which is going to have an impact then on individuals, on families, and on countries. One of the things that must come out of this experience and is what is happening now to try to transcend these barriers to working together in solidarity with a really practical approach to equity and caring for each other, understanding that we, to a large degree, share the same fate by being on this earth together.
It's very hard to pick one threat that we face, but there's one that strikes me and I'm impressed by it every single day, and it's a failure to collaborate. It's a failure to come together. It's a failure to listen to the other side. It's a failure to try and understand what the other side is saying, what the other side wants, what the other side has experienced. And it leads to an obstacle, to a barrier to moving forward, whether it's a barrier for people to get immunized, a barrier for kids wearing masks in school. It's a barrier we can surmount, but it has to begin with a willingness to listen to other people.
What do you think, from your experience, is the single greatest threat we will face in the next 50 years?
Well, I think the biggest threat that we're facing over the next 50 years is climate change and the impact that it will have on our environment. So if you think about not just changing weather patterns, but the impact that it can have on our water resources, our food resources, I think that it can also end up making places uninhabitable. Maybe we won't have enough food or resources because now regions that we've been able to grow food in, we can't grow it anymore. So we have to look at these problems and get some of the brightest minds working on them very quickly so that we can secure our future here on this planet.
You know, I don't think this is the last pandemic that we will be facing. There's the constant threat of cluster of cases, of outbreaks that have the potential to become pandemics if they are not detected early enough and managed appropriately. So what we really need is to augment the field epidemiology capacity to be able to detect, investigate, and prevent future pandemics. And I think this is the single biggest threat that we will face in the next 50 years.
After the Second World War, the public saw the skeletons come out of Auschwitz, the firebombing of Dresden, the mushroom clouds over Nagasaki and Hiroshima. A line had been crossed, and people said, we never want that again. And individually and as nations, we each gave up a little tiny bit of our sovereignty. And all of a sudden, there was this profusion of an alphabet soup of the United Nations Security Council, WHO, UNICEF, UNESCO, the World Bank. These organizations that were birthed out of the horror of the Second World War were the glue that has kept our society, our world together for 70 years with no more wars like that. My biggest fear is that the organizations are long in the tooth, is that people have grown weary of giving up a little bit of their sovereignty, that we don't remember how horrible it can be if war began again, and that individual liberty, freedom, selfishness, materialism, all of those things have overrun the idea that we're all in it together. That's the biggest threat to me.
This is important to me because I'm a grandfather, and I think in terms of what my grandchildren's grandchildren will be thinking. One of the real problems is the problem of fatalism, the belief that you cannot change your future. And this is why it's so hard for some people, for instance, to give up smoking. They don't actually think they can change their future. It's one of the most important lessons we can teach young children. You can change what happens in the future.
I want to thank you all, but I also may not sleep tonight. One more question. Do these threats seem to be a mandate to be good ancestors, to become better ancestors in the human race?
I think we can become better ancestors by making sure that we can have a continual corporate memory of what we've been through and how we can make things better in the future, and let our position as ancestors be able to give to the people following us the benefit of our experience. And I think that's the way a good grandfather and grandmother imparts upon their grandchildren the wisdom that they have over the years. What went wrong, what went right, and I think that's our responsibility. So I like that terminology, good ancestors.
Thank you, Dr. Fauci. Thank you, everyone. So it's big. The stakes are high to become better ancestors. Where do we even begin? In 1980, the World Health Organization declared the world free from smallpox. For the first time in history, a human infectious disease had been eradicated. This was a monumental achievement. Smallpox killed a third of those it infected, resulting in the death and disfigurement of hundreds of millions of people. After decades of efforts by hundreds of thousands of public health and government workers, as well as significant international financing and cooperation, the fight was finally over. So how did we do it? How do we eradicate smallpox? How did we wipe this horrible disease from our planet? That's exactly what this series is about. The scientists, doctors, and advocates who have led us through one of the deadliest diseases ever to plague humankind have something important to teach us.
Brian introduced me, and he introduced our panelists, so I want to introduce Brian. Brian brings a wealth of experience, not in public health so much as in producing TVs for entertainment in Hollywood. You've heard of Hollywood. That's not the home of public health, of global health that we usually think of. And Brian decided he wanted to become a better ancestor and decided to work for social justice and is just completing up an MPH at the Rollins School of Public Health in Atlanta. We were so lucky to come across Brian. And Brian worked closely with Lisa Hayes, who's here in the front row, to put together the films you see. And Cheryl Golub, who did our teaching guide and learning guide. It's been a wonderful team. So thank you all. And you got to see some of the films, but again, these films as teaching tools are all available to you for free on the website, 9lessons.org, and we hope you'll take the cards with you to use as a tool. I want to come to this 9th lesson, equity. But first, I want to ask people on the panel, what are the threats that they are most worried about? If you had to pick one threat that worries you most, that keeps you up at night, that makes you scared for future generations, what would you say? Let me start with you, Rebecca, and we'll go down the line.
Thank you. There's two parts to this. I think the lack of trust in science. When I hear patients come to me and they'll say, I did my own research, Dr. Weintraub. And I spend most of the patient encounter trying to understand the conspiracy theories that they were exposed to. And now I have less time to care for them with evidence-based medicine. And the second piece, which I think is a threat, is our collective interest. And it's back to your ethical framework of how we interact with each other, how we view our collective powers versus our individual needs.
Thanks, Rebecca. Judy?
So there is a lot to be concerned about, certainly. But I think what keeps me up is climate and health, including both health and mental health. And so much of that, for me, actually comes from my own family. I have 3 adult children, and they are quite concerned. And then when I've talked to youth recently, I mean, some are hopeless because when they look at the impact of climate on the environment, but that's impacting their health now. So that keeps me up at night.
Thanks, Judy.
At this moment, since I'm in education and a dean of a school of public health, the thing that really worries me most about the future is how much we are investing or actually not investing in building young leadership. Leadership is so important, and the fact that it is mentioned as number 7, leadership and management, reminds us that our future is dependent on very strong leadership. We are still struggling with the challenge of the COVID pandemic, and we have seen how much leadership has been subjected to incredible external forces that try to undermine them. And we need a new generation of leaders that have been supported by us to exercise many of these aspects. Leaders today are required to be communicators of the first level with great confidence in really what is described here as number 6, which is engaging communities in generating communication messages that are culturally aware and culturally competent, and using vehicles of communication that are relevant and valid. We also want young leaderships to be astute and capable of building coalitions. This is not easy. It doesn't come without educating and building competencies. So the new leadership in public health needs skills and needs support and needs nurturing and needs mentorship that is very intentional. And we need to invest a great deal. I look around the room and I look at some of the young people around the room, and I hope that they are going to be our leaders of the future.
Thanks, Ayman. Georges.
You know, the thing that bothers me the most is this paradigm of false choices. You know, far too often people present you with a problem, and then they present you with 2 opposing views of the world. You know, we can't solve our climate change problem because it will take away jobs. We can't deal with gun violence because the only way to do that is we're going to take away our guns. You know, we cannot give women choice. because we're going to address, a theological issue which nearly none of us can really answer today. Things like this where people give you these false choices and you really run down a rabbit hole trying to solve them because you find yourself defensive in trying to solve a problem which really isn't a problem. And you're not really getting to the core of the issue. And the challenge we have in public health is that we have everything we try to do is a very complex problem of interacting forces between human behavior, our environment, our genetics, and politics. And in trying to solve some of those things.
Does someone else have a mic for George? Try Judy's, George's.
Thank you. So in the course of trying to solve those things, we go down a pathway of insolvable questions and answers versus identifying the problem, identifying the root cause of the problem, and actually trying to solve it in a collective way and not listening along the way as we try to solve it.
Thanks, George. I want to add one thing because I heard one of you mention hopelessness, that sometimes it seems hopeless, that the problems are so abundant and so complicated and so big. I think for us working on this project, we hope that bringing back into view this extraordinary achievement of global health in eradicating smallpox, it was extraordinary what was done. It wasn't done by one man, it wasn't done by one organization, it wasn't done by a small group of people, despite what Margaret Mead may sometimes say, that indeed a small group of committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that does. Not quite. The eradication of smallpox took, in the form of a coalition, more than 250,000 people working together. We talk about powerful coalitions, but they brought about an extraordinary achievement, one we should also take pride in. That was the holy grail for global health, eradication of a disease. Not only did it protect everyone in India and then Bangladesh and then in Somalia and the rest of the world, not only does it protect all of us, but it protects all the people who are yet unborn, the future generations to come. This was a spectacular achievement. And at a time when public health and global health have taken some pretty hard hits and come in for some pretty severe criticism from many quarters, it's good to remember this. Yes, we can. Yes, we did. And that's part of the value of focusing on smallpox, putting the shine back on public health and global health, taking away the sense of hopelessness that no problems, even this problem that killed more than 300 million people in the last century alone, has now been eradicated, the efforts of global health. Global health does some pretty amazing things. One of the amazing things about the eradication of smallpox is it was really the production, as close as we can get to perfection, of true global health equity. Everybody has the same risk of getting smallpox. It's zero for all of us, no matter where we live, whether we're rich or poor, whether we live in a rich or poor nation, whether we were born 100 years ago, 45 years ago, or not yet born, we have the same risk. That notion of equity and global health equity is really important. I want to ask a last question of our panelists, and then we'll open it up for questions. But it's about that question of equity, and I'm going to ask us to give relatively short answers so that we can hear from you questions on any subject about this. But let me start with you, Rebecca. Equity drives so much of what you do. Why did you pick equity as an important goal?
Well, I think when I look back to these 9 lessons, equity for me is the aim. This is the vector where we're trying to gain momentum. It's not a banner to put up on a sign or a logo. And what I notice with the trainees that I work with is they are looking for new ways to navigate towards equity. They want new tools, they want new signposts, they want to learn from the strategies and the expertise, but they see they need the data, the analytics, the analysis, the monitoring to not just describe the disparities, but show when and where we've gained momentum.
Make equity visible through data, through science. Know the truth. Are we approaching equity? Thanks, Rebecca. Judy?
Yeah, so
Oh, you have the dead one, I think.
No, I think it just had been turned on. So on the issue and focus of equity at the CDC Foundation, we've really been laser focused and making sure that it's embedded in everything that we do because we believe so strongly. And I love how you said smallpox is such a great example of global equity. None of us are at risk because of what happened. That really encapsulates, I think, the vision that we have at the foundation. There's just, and if you unpack it, all boats rise, right? I mean, the equity is something that we need to do, not because it's only the right thing to do, but we all are going to be living in a healthier and better world if we apply equity principles in a meaningful and deliberate way. And it's got to be top of mind in everything that we do. So that's the way we've been approaching it at the foundation.
Thanks, Judy. Ayman?
Yeah, I will use Camara Jones' definition where she says equity is not equality. And to achieve equity, we need investment. But also, borrowing from what George has just said, that this is not a zero-sum game, that if we invest in equity, we all win. We have to believe that. We have to understand that. We have to show the evidence for that. And we have to propagate this narrative. This narrative continues not to be propagated adequately.
I've known George's for, I would say, at least 30 years. And in the beginning, we both worked in the same field of injury prevention and control and violence prevention. And I know that you've done extraordinary work in that field, George. And the slogan that was on the podium this morning during the plenary and throughout here talks about APHA and talks about leading the path to equity. So I know it's part of your core of what you do, but maybe you could talk a little bit about where you see we need to do better in this country and around the world in terms of equity.
Equity, I think, starts with valuing each of us equally and recognizing that human beings are here, and if you don't value everybody equally, then we're not going to be very successful. We all have children, those of us who have kids or grandkids, and I may not give them all what they need or want at the same time, but I value all of my kids and all my grandkids equally. And in doing so, I may do one thing with one because that's what they need to flourish, and give another one something a little different because I've learned how they respond to things, and my goal is to have them all thrive. And so I think what we were trying to accomplish with our theme this year was to have a series of academic discussions and engagements which move our world forward in this whole idea of valuing each and every one of us the same, but giving each and every one of us what we need. And I think, when we go to our closing session, we're going to talk about ethics. And I think there's an ethical principle there because, again, that's one of those false choices that people continue to put out there. If I treat people differently, I'm somehow diminishing the others not recognizing that I'm really valuing everyone equally, hopefully because I'm in the health business, trying to get them all to be as healthy as they possibly can, but giving them what they need in order to achieve that goal.
Thanks, Georges. Paul Farmer summed it up for me in a way that's really powerful. He said, the root of all evil is a belief that some lives are worth less than others. The root of all evil is a belief that some lives are worth less than others. So equity is a driving force, it's a driving lesson here. And you've heard from the panel, people I think are all very committed to becoming better ancestors. I want to open it up to some comments from all of you, or questions, I guess mostly questions for the panel or for the people who worked on this project that you might have. Please state your name and then give us your question. Try to keep it short and we'll have time to go around. Yes. Yeah.
Hi, I want to thank everybody on the panel for just such inspiration. My name is Susan Harris, and I'd like for a moment to focus on lesson number 7 about the leadership, because it troubles me that we don't have a pipeline. And I happen to think that we have a very teachable moment, having been through this 2-year-plus experience of COVID. And we actually, even as we know from the news and the schools and universities, we're still suffering the aftermaths of it. So not only physically in long COVID, but mentally, socially, emotionally. So I think using COVID as a teachable moment, I'd like to suggest that maybe we move the leadership, the seating of leaders, down to the public school level, the K-12 level, because they don't know from smallpox or a lot of these more historical illnesses, but they do know COVID. And I feel that if you could have a movie, a curriculum that would include this, that maybe we could sow these leaders at yet an earlier level, because I fear that, the public health major, even at the college level, isn't a common thing, or even a concentration in public health. And I think if we begin earlier, we can make the whole continuum work. So I'd like to get your ideas about that.
Anyone?
Well, as a pediatrician and a parent, I couldn't agree with you more. You cannot start building leadership too early. And it's a process, but I think we adults need to know how to encourage leadership in our children, in our youth, and we as mentors need to have a pathway towards mentoring young leaders to achieve the goals and the competencies that are required. So number one, I agree with you completely. Number two, your suggestion is a great one. We need to engage educators to be able to do that. And I think part of the problem is that public health now is clearly cannot be siloed. That is obvious. And so we need to engage schools, universities, places of work, places of worship. We need to engage everybody in the public health movement. I couldn't agree more.
Can I add one thing? You also wanted to include the political will, because the problem with education is that it's so decentralized. You have different states, red and blue, and you have local school districts that do their own thing.
You need the mic, you're saying important things.
I'm concerned about political will and what it will take to move the education system to do that, because it's so decentralized. And we have red states, we have blue states, we have school districts within different states, each doing its own thing, more or less connected to state education regulations. And I just don't know how we get the political will to make any of this happen.
Thanks very much. I think that's a great suggestion. It's one that we'll take away with us to think about how to do this at a lower level. There's a line behind you, so let's go through, but thank you for the suggestion.
Well, thank you so much. My name is Brian, and I will disclose this. I'm from Uganda, and so my question is going to be more global in nature. When you talk about global equity and access to resources or tools that actually make a difference on ground, oftentimes we know that in the United States there is in fact questions on access to all the different ethnicities. There is that challenge in the United States. When you scale that up, there is even a bigger problem when it comes to the underserved world, the developing world. And sort of during distribution, oftentimes, those of us that exist in developing countries get the tail end of things. Right now, there is Ebola, an outbreak of Ebola in Uganda, and it's not top of mind of most professions or most people, not in the media, and it's really a story that is in the background somewhere, and oftentimes it's because it's not close home. It's not in America, or it's not in the UK. My question is, how do we improve drastically access of all these amazing tools and technologies to the developing world? And for a moment, is it possible to focus on the actual doers, people that are on ground making a difference in those communities, as opposed to, there are some thinkers, great thinkers, but sometimes they're so far apart or distant from what is happening in reality. How do we tip that needle? And I say this because I think this is an invitation, because people like me that exist in both worlds, having the opportunity to be in the United States and yet be able to have an ancestry back home and doing work back home, how do I tap into utilizing, the resources or the information that you have that has made such a difference here back in countries like my own?
Thank you.
I just wanted to say, I don't want you to leave the microphone feeling pessimistic. A very recent publication that we published in Nature just last week on a consensus on COVID-19, 386 researchers from the four corners of the world, from 112 countries, all agreed that equity was an essential principle in overcoming the pandemic. So there is at least agreement. The most important thing is that your voice needs to be heard, and therefore that puts, unfortunately, part of the responsibility on you to present yourself to the microphone and continue to voice your opinion. We can be advocates all we want. Advocacy will never replace representation. Never. Be at the mic, take your mask off, and have your voice heard constantly. Because without that, there is something missing.
How do I collaborate with you to get some of this work done?
Why don't you come up after and have a conversation? Let's get something going. Let's do it.
My name is Lisa Smooth. I'm currently working on a project. We're reforming California's behavioral health system for children, family, and youth. Rebecca has heard me rant about this all summer. I'm sorry. So for the past 8 months, my job has been to go around and listen to people across the state of California in all different communities, 40 million people, not all of them, I didn't get to all of them, but listening to people across the state of California to hear what it is that they need, what kind of a system we need to build so that we can meet their stated need instead of what somebody thinks that they need. And part of that has also been going and speaking with people who work within the existing systems to find out what are the barriers, what are their needs in order to make this. And the thing that keeps coming up for me that I'm really, really stuck with is this lack of hope that I keep coming up against. A lack of hope in the community that things will ever change and that anyone will ever meet their needs. And a lack of hope within the systems of their ability to actually meet the needs or to make the changes, or that there'll be the political willpower to continue the effort, or that the funding won't go away, or, the list goes on and on and on. And this sort of feeling of heaviness and pessimism. And that's the thing that scares me the most, because we can design the best, and one of the young people said this, you can design the best mental health care program in the world, but I'm not going to believe it, and I'm not probably going to go to it, because you've never ever met my needs before, you've never listened to me before. And then the same people working within the system, showing up. These are not bad people. These are good people trying to do good work, trying to serve the community, trying to deliver mental health. And so defeated that they just want to show up and they go through the motions, but they don't believe that things can really change or that they have it within them to do things really differently. How do you build hope? What have you learned in your lessons about making people believe again enough that they're willing to take a chance and try the program, or they're willing to step outside of their normal day-to-day processes, or give up a small amount of certainty or power that they hold in their position and surrender that for a greater good and try to make it better? Do we have any lessons that we can draw on to give the most powerful medicine, which is hope?
I think you've learned from your surveys some incredibly valuable truths about the state of belief and the state of hopelessness and despair among people and the need for better mental health care. But I think some of these lessons do bear on that. I think knowing the truth means you have to go seek it. It's not what you thought it to be growing up. It's not what you learned in your family, in your sector, in your ethnic enclave. You need to go find out what the truth is, and you did. You went out and found the truth. I think it also bears on this first lesson, this is a cause and effect world. Because what it says is if you understand the causes, if you know the risk factors for depression, hopelessness, despair, suicide, youth suicide. In Georgia, there was a recent survey that looked at suicide among young children and found that there was an epidemic in children as young as 8 years old. But if you understand the causes, you can change the effects, it says. And if you can change the effects, you can change the effects for the better. And that gives us reason to hope. And that means that we can change the world. We can improve it. We can give a better world going to the future. So some of these lessons are not just instructions for how to do it, but kind of give us the moral sustenance and an ability to go ahead with the beliefs ourselves, because we have to believe that our work makes a difference. And you heard Bill Foege this morning in his talk say, if you go into public health, there are two things you won't get. You won't get money, you won't get well paid, and you won't get people thanking you, because people don't thank you for the things that don't happen. They don't thank APHA for all the prevention it does. They're quick to blame if something goes wrong, but he says you won't get a lot of money and you won't get thanks, but you can change the world for them. And this puts you in an important leadership position, and this brings us to the leadership lesson too. Sometimes it's our job to give hope and help people see and understand. But I think your doing that survey taught you some really invaluable lessons. You know the truth that wasn't obvious before. It wasn't there. George's.
Yeah, I think that the short answer to the question is you have to show them success. I remember I was a health commissioner in D.C., and my medical director came in just in tears. And she'd been out, she was our engagement with young children, and basically, you know, she had lots of kids, and, you know, she'd given them all the important lessons about HIV/AIDS and teenage pregnancy, and don't carry firearms and all that. And these kids set her down. And these were, you know, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old kids who said, you know, Doc, we got your lessons. We understand. We got you. We understand what's happening here. But, you know, I'm not going to live long enough. These little mini epidemiologists understood the epidemiology of AIDS and said, you know, I go to more funerals for AIDS and people dying, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to wear gold chains, and I'm going to have babies, and I'm going to live a full life, just as you would if you had a terminal disease. And she just came back, and we realized that we needed to get these kids out of the environment because, in essence, their world, their concept of their world was very, very different. And you know, and this is in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. And so we spent a lot of time trying to get these kids out of that environment, showing them success, showing them people of color, showing women who have been successful, showing them men who've been successful. And I think we were moderately successful in doing that. But in many ways, the solution was trying to show these kids success and that there were people that needed to get out. And we also tried to find people who had gotten out, who had been successful in their communities and brought them back.
One last thing I'd like to say is that you cannot build hope where there is no trust. So we have to build trust.
Toby?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tobi Oyedele. I'm from Nigeria. My question is that equity has so rarely been achieved. What is the argument against equity? Yeah, that's my question.
I'm going to take something away. You're going to take something away from me. Fear that you're going to take something away from me. And that's exactly what we got right now. You know, with the grievance that we have right now is all about, you're going to take something from me. You're going to take my job. You know, my lot in life, my challenges are all your fault. My privilege, yeah. Not recognizing, in many ways, the privileged status that they have. You know, and then, and granted, they may not have had the life that they had wanted to have, and life may have been very tough for them, but, you know, two groups of folks in the same community based on race or ethnicity, maybe at the same income level, have different outcomes, but they don't see it because they're fearful. And the problem now in our society, I believe, is that there are people who should know better who are exacerbating that line of reasoning and for political purposes, which is all about power.
And we have many examples where public health gains have been proven not to be permanent. We are celebrating the eradication of smallpox at a moment where polio has reappeared in New York City.
On this question of equity, again, I just want to add, those of you who heard Larry Gostin speak this morning, he's consulting with WHO, and he said he was working on the international health regulations. And the international health regulations are a set of diseases that countries have to report. And the reason you have to report them is because if this disease is in your country, you represent a threat to me if you bring it into my country. It's a threat to me if you bring Ebola into my country from Uganda. It's a threat to me if you bring multiply resistant TB into my country or onto my airplane. So these international health regulations are set up to detect diseases that are threats to me. What we need are regulations that aren't based on threats, but are based on the belief that I want to know what's happening in your country Because if something happens to the people in your country, if they're suffering, that diminishes me. Because they are human beings whose lives are just as important. Because I believe in equity. Those are the kind of regulations and reporting we need, based on equity, not based on fear and threats and self-protection. These are some of the things that do go against incorporating equity into the international laws that we're working on revising right now. So there are lots of things we can do to improve equity and to show that we value other lives as we do our own. One more question.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm Sherilyn Cook. I'm a primary care internist and recently became a county health officer for a rural county in California, Nevada County. So I would say in both positions, what has frustrated me the most over the last few years in the COVID pandemic has been the question of, I'm doing my own research, we don't all accept the facts. People don't accept something as fact. So I have a difficult time moving from, say, less than 2, since people don't accept the facts, we can't get through the rest of the process here. And also, I'll just put it plainly, selfishness. People are all about me, I'm not about you. So, like the instance that came up about Ebola, well, that's in a foreign country, that's not me, I don't want it to impact me. So how do we move as a world, I'm looking at it from a county. How do we move people who don't accept the facts, and how can we get people to be concerned about more than themselves? A very basic question, but it's frustrated me for the last 2 years, 3 years.
Thanks. It's a very important public good, this shared commitment to others and community responsibility, our responsibility for each other. Let me see, we are running out of time, but Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you for your question. When we think of what visual helped individuals understand why we need to stay at home, was the idea that anyone could get into a car accident, anyone's uncle might need a gallbladder removal or a gunshot, or we needed to reserve the beds for the trauma and accidents in our lives. And viewing the number of hospital beds in the United States or any nation helped people think through, gosh, I at one point might need to go to the hospital and I'd like there to be a hospital bed for my family. So that unit of reserve helped some folks realize, gosh, if I stay at home, I'm protecting a capacity that I might need in the future. This is one of the most, I think, complex things as providers and caregivers that we have, that we want to establish that trust first and hear what people are being, in a sense, exposed to. May it be like in the water, they've been exposed to these conspiracy theories that have truly altered their ability to absorb truth and science. And it's been shown it is your relationship with them, your longitudinal relation with them, which is our only path forward.
And that's very true. With my patients, I had got a lot further than I did when I was seeing someone else's patients. But I can tell you, I got nowhere with one of my good friends, 26-year-olds, who doesn't believe in the vaccine. Nowhere.
This business of public health is hard. It is really hard. I assume that most of you work in the area of public health. Is there anyone here who thinks it's an easy field? It's a weird question, crazy question. It is hard. It's really hard. And why do we do it? Why do we do it? I think we do it because we are committed to helping, to treating other people well, to helping the whole community, not just one patient at a time. But it is hard. Our hope in this series of lessons and in the questions, the checklist, is that it can be useful to you and helpful to you as you go about your work. We have a number of things on the website for you to use. There is a video series, the 9 lessons for each one. There's a video that has separate parts that you can look at. Download it, use it in your teaching. Discuss this as you mentor people. This is a good subject, a good set of subjects to use for your mentoring discussions. There's the case study on smallpox that Rebecca's team delivered using the global health delivery case method and approach. But again, for teaching, deriving business lessons, deriving delivery lessons, it's invaluable there. There's the learning guides that you can look at. We encourage you to look at those. There's discussions about the different movie segments, the different video segments. Cheryl did an extraordinary job on this. And again, it's there for you to use, to download, to take, and to use in teaching. And there's the 9 lessons checklist, this little card that we hope you'll take with you and keep. There will be more of these. You can download this from the website as well. The website is rich, and we hope getting richer. The future really does depend on what all of you do. And I want to thank all of you for coming. It's 6 o'clock, and I want to thank you for staying. I want to invite you to stop by our booth tomorrow and Wednesday at the Paramount Theater Lounge. It's right on the first floor, off the lobby. There'll be all of us there to talk to you more about this. We want to help you take these, use them, answer questions that you have, and pursue ideas that you raised today. So please stop by to see us at the Paramount Theater Lounge. And again, I just want to say that public health and global health are important to all of you. They're important to all of us. You've heard from extraordinary people on the panel. And again, please help me thank Georges and Ayman and Judy and Rebecca. Thank you all very, very much. They're all continuing to work. They're still working. Ayman told me he's over 70 and still going strong. Retirement is not even on his radar. I think for many of us, we're committed to seeing these things through. You're committed to seeing these things through. And I think what all of us really want is a relationship with a future generation that will let us feel we have been a better ancestor. That's where the title of the project comes from. It's something that we all aspire to, and we hope we can give you an easier path to that. Thank you all again very, very much.